Aundria Michelle Bowman was born in June 23, 1974, in New Orleans, Louisiana. She was born healthy and had two striking features, that being her green eyes and wide smile. When she disappeared in 1989, she was nothing more than your typical American teenager in Hamilton, Michigan. To all the adults and authorities, it seemed to be nothing more than a run-of-the-mill, runaway angsty teenager. At least, that was how it looked like on the outside. Aundria Michelle Bowman was actually born as Alexis Miranda Badger. When she was just 5 months old, she was placed for adoption by her biological mother, Kathleen Doyle, who was 17 at the time. Fortunately, just after a year and 4 months of being placed for adoption, the Bowman family decided that they would adopt Alexis and bring her into a nice, loving home out in Hamilton, Michigan. The family decided that the name didn't quite fit her and chose to rename her as Andrea, which is associated as being strong-willed and brave. Andrea was raised mostly by her adoptive father, Dennis Bowman, in the small and quiet town Hamilton. During all the years she spent at the Bowman family, there was nothing alarming or out of the ordinary. However, all that seemed nice had taken a dark turn. In 1988, at 14 years old, Andrea had told her school staff in high school that she hated going back home and that she feared for her life. When questioned about why she was afraid and what caused her to hate going home, she dropped the ball and accused her adoptive father, Dennis Bowman, of molesting her. This was no small matter, and the staff took it very seriously and involved the police. Of course, when they asked Andrea again why she was so afraid, she told them once again, including the police, that her adoptive father, Dennis Bowman, was molesting her. A school worker and an officer brought Andrea back to her adoptive parents' house and confronted the Bowman parents about what Andrea told them at school. But Dennis and his wife refused the allegations, simply claiming that Andrea had begun her rebellious stage in her life and that it only gotten stronger because she was told that she was adopted when she was an infant, when she was no more than 21 months old. It seemed to be a very logical stance. Andrea had just begun her teenage years, started a new year in high school, meeting a whole new bunch of people, and just learned that she was adopted. That was a lot to process. Shortly after the accusations, the Bowman family decided to relocate to a mobile home in an isolated and rural area within the Allegan County, perhaps to get rid of the accusations. But shortly after the relocation, Aundria Michelle Bowman disappeared. On March 11, 1989, Andrea had mysteriously disappeared from her family's rural property. Her family called the police and informed them of her disappearance. The police interviewed Dennis Bowman, who saw her and confirmed her last location to be on their rural property. Dennis told the police that she had stolen some money from them before running away. Shortly after her disappearance, the Bowman family again relocated from the rural mobile home to an undisclosed location. Since her disappearance, there has been no reports or witnesses of seeing Andrea. In fact, the only person who have claimed to have sightings of her was her adoptive mother, who made several calls to the police, stating that she had just seen Andrea, but none of those sightings were confirmed or substantiated. When the news broke out about Andrea's disappearance, her biological mother, Kathleen Doyle, did everything she could to cooperate with the authorities and help find her missing biological daughter. She even provided her DNA to help identify unknown remains in 1999, which helped narrow down victims in another case and identify a Jane Doe. With no leads and no whereabouts of Andrea, the case went cold and was left labeled and classified as a teenage runaway due solely to the fact that she stole some money before her disappearance. In fact, in the official video published and remastered in February 26, 2010, Andrea Bowman was featured in the music video Runaway Train by Soul Asylum. She was only one of the many missing teenagers featured in the music video, alongside Christopher Kurz. For well over 30 years, Andrea's whereabouts were unknown. However, something drastic happened decades later that helped the police crack the cold case wide open. On September 11th, 1980, a young 25-year-old woman was found dead by her friends inside her house on Granby Street near Ocean View. Her name was Kathleen O'Brien Doyle. She had been raped, stabbed with a knife, and choked with a cord. She had been dead for more than 24 hours when her friends found her lifeless body. She was a daughter of a naval officer and a wife to a Navy pilot, who she had been married for only 9 months at the time. Her husband was deployed in the Indian Ocean after their marriage, leaving her alone in the house. The police gathered all the evidence they could get. This included the weapons that were used as well as DNA evidence, which at the time was not advanced and was only in the beginning stages of identification. 4 years later, in 1984, the police had custody of 2 known serial killers in the area, Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole. However, with further investigation, it was proven that neither of them had anything to do with Doyle's death, and with that, the case went cold. That is until 2018, after many years, scientists were confident with their advancements with DNA identification and biological technology. The cold case soon fell into Victor Powell, a Norfolk detective's lap. Without hesitation, he and the NCIS contacted a DNA lab to conduct an analysis of the DNA from the bedspread of Kathleen Doyle's crime scene. When the analysis came back to the police, the report included a list of more than 30 possible suspects that had, quote, potential kinship relations. One of them being Dennis Bowman, Andrea's adoptive father. You see, Dennis Bowman was not your typical go-to-work 9-to-5 husband and father. In fact, he had a criminal record. In the year 1980, he had attempted to kidnap a 19-year-old teenager at gunpoint. The girl's name is undisclosed. Fortunately, the girl managed to escape and told the authorities about the terrifying encounter. Dennis pleaded guilty after working a deal with the prosecutors of the case, and was only released from prison in 1986. However, while on parole for that horrendous crime, Dennis was arrested after a young woman claimed that he tried to lure and assault her in the forest in the west side of Michigan. Keep in mind that Dennis Bowman was still serving time for his attempted kidnapping of the 19-year-old when he decided that he would try and lure and assault another woman. Fortunately, those 2 victims were lucky, but one woman, Kathleen Doyle, was unlucky, and fate would have her be Dennis Bowman's prey. So when the DNA evidence came back from the lab, Dennis Bowman had a positive ID with the DNA that matched the bedspread. But his DNA did not just match one item. Rather, his DNA had also matched multiple additional evidence from Kathleen Doyle's case, making him the lead suspect. Although the date is never confirmed, it is without a doubt that in 1980, Dennis Bowman had set his motive to hurting and harming young women. Not only did he attempt kidnapping, but he had murdered Kathleen Doyle in the same year. With the overwhelming evidence, the police quickly got the arrest warrant they needed for his arrest. And in November 22nd, 2019, the police arrested Dennis Bowman in Allegan County, Michigan. In February, 4 months after his arrest, Dennis Bowman confessed to the gruesome murder and act. At the time, Dennis Bowman was 31 years old and was in the Navy Reserve. He was assigned to the USS Piedmont and was serving his 2-week drill in Norfolk. He said he was drunk and only entered Kathleen Doyle's house in order to burglarize it. He broke in through the back window, which led to a spare bedroom. When he made his way through the house, he saw his victim. he admitted to physically assaulting Kathleen in a bedroom, during which she was stabbed. When everything was said and done, Dennis claimed that he thought Kathleen Doyle was alive when he left. He ultimately pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, rape, and burglary, and for those heinous crimes against Kathleen Doyle, the court judge sentenced Dennis Bowman to 2 life sentences in prison. But what does this have to do with Aundria Bowman? Andrea was still missing and no one had any whereabouts to where she was, even 30 years after her disappearance. Well, in early February 2020, when Dennis Bowman waited for his incarceration for the murder of Kathleen Doyle, Dennis confessed to the police about Andrea. The truth is, Dennis Bowman had murdered his adoptive daughter and buried her near his mobile home in Allegan County. Several days after his confession, the police discovered Andrea's skeletal remains with DNA confirmation in the 3200 block of 136th Avenue of Monterey Township. Andrea's remains were covered and concealed only by a thin layer of cement. Dennis Bowman never explicitly stated why he had killed her, but given what we know about Andrea's allegations and Dennis Bowman's actions, we can speculate that Dennis Bowman felt threatened by Andrea's accusations because her accusations of abuse was true. During Dennis Bowman's years of crime, he had probably done terrible things to Andrea, and when she spoke out to authorities, he did not like it one bit. Knowing that Andrea is older and people will, without a doubt, listen to her, since she is no longer just a child, Dennis Bowman decided she had to be silenced. On May 15th, 2020, Dennis Bowman was charged with the murder of Andrea, his adopted daughter, and on December 22nd, 2021, Dennis Bowman pleaded guilty with no contest for second-degree murder of Andrea. For that, he was sentenced to an additional 35 to 50 years in prison on top of his sentence for the murder of Kathleen Doyle. It is a shame that it took an innocent woman's death for the confession of Andrea Bowman's whereabouts to be discovered, and it is horrifying to think what had happened in that household being so close to such an evil individual. But for her friends, her loved ones, her biological mother, Kathy Turkanian, there is some solace in knowing what happened to her and knowing that the crimes committed on her did not go unpunished. Thank you so much for watching. This is the first true solved crimes video, and I thought it would make more sense to have actual, real photos and videos. Unlike the unsolved mysteries, where there is little to nothing to go on, these true solved crimes have suspects, leads, evidence, and general information pertaining to the investigation. I specifically made it so that the animated parts of the video are reenactments or reimaginations of the events. For me, I would like to use more real-life footage as opposed to animations for these types of videos, but I want to ask you, would you like to see more of these true crime videos? And if so, do you want to see more real-life footage? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.